can I please just go through some protocols with you, the usual and standard protocols. So please, if you can, turn off your microphone when you're not speaking. This is to prevent any background noise. We appreciate that sometimes on virtual meetings it can be tempting to do other things, but please afford yourself the time to be as present in the learning space as you can. We would like to encourage as much active participation in this session as possible. Please also, as usual, use the chat pane to make any comment or ask a question for others during the session. You can also post any resource links in the chat pane, and that's helpful to all to see. You can also use the chat pane to communicate any technical issues. We have somebody from Speakeasy on the call just now, and so she will be able to support. So please use the chat function there. If you lose connection, please do not panic. Just come back in, following the joining instructions that you've already received. If you would like to tweet about your experience, please use the hashtag SLF Online. But most importantly, we hope that you will enjoy this session. If we could move to the next slide, please. So as I've said already, thank you very much for attending this morning's well-informed and innovative approaches to learning, teaching and assessment session. I will introduce this and then pass over to Michelle Moore, who is the current head teacher, and Fraser McCallum, the deputy head teacher from North Berwick High School, for the main part of the session. During the presentation, as we've already mentioned, please post comments and questions in the chat pane. So to introduce myself, I'm Frances Graham, and I'm one of Her Majesty's inspectors. Unfortunately, however, I was not personally involved in the inspection of North Berwick High School when my colleagues visited and conducted a full model inspection early in 2020. North Berwick High School is a non-denominational secondary school with 5 associated primary schools. The senior leadership team consists of head teacher and 3 deputy head teachers and 2 business managers who share a post. The current head teacher, as I've said, Michelle, has been in post since August 2021. While gathering our evidence, it was clear that staff were developing a range of well-informed and innovative approaches to learning, teaching and assessment. These were supporting young people at all stages take responsibility for their own learning and progress to improve their attainment. The positive impact that the wide range of professional learning activities had on the quality of leadership for learning at all levels in the school was also evident. In particular, the focus on critical engagement with professional reading and a programme of action research was empowering all teachers to develop their practice to meet their unique individual professional needs, as well as the needs of young people. This was therefore highlighted as practice worth sharing more widely, and a sketch note developed, which is on the Education Scotland website. And we hope after today's presentation, you will agree with us. As explained, if you have any comments, questions during the session, please post them and we'll follow them up if we can and time allows later. I'm now going to pass over to Michelle and her team to explain more about how this work, about this work and how it continues to develop. Michelle.
Thank you, Frances, for that very kind introduction. So, as Frances said, I'm Michelle Moore. I've been the head teacher just since August 2021. So I don't take any credit for the wonderful work that we hope to present to you today. We're a school of just over 1,000 pupils here in East Lothian, and I think it's fair to say that we've been on a learning journey of our own with all things professional learning over the last few years. I was a deputy head here back in 2013, and although I've gone off to be a quality improvement officer in Edinburgh in the interim period, I was at North Berwick when the first seeds of professional learning communities and our shared understanding of effective teaching practices were planted. I'm delighted that my DHT with strategic responsibility for all things QI 2.3 is here today, Fraser McCallum. And I'm going to hand over to Fraser to share what we've strived for and learned along the way. You won't be able to see Fraser as he's presenting, but he has promised to come on and say hello at the end. Fraser, over to you. Fraser, you appear to still be on mute.
Contract only for 2 weeks with an option.
Do we have Fraser? I'm not hearing him.
Give me 1 second.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Super, thank you, Fraser. Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Francis, for the introduction there. My name is Fraser McCallum, DHT with responsibility for learning, teaching and assessment, and for career-long professional learning at North Berwick High School. I do apologise, when I'm in presenting mode, for some reason the camera is automatically switching off, so unfortunately you can't see me while I'm presenting, but as Michelle says, at the end of the presentation I will come up on the screen. So the first thing that I want to speak about is by making brief reference to the OECD's integrated model of the school as a learning organisation. And we at North Berwick have found it really useful to use this document as an audit tool and really just codifying the spaces and the places where professional learning is occurring or should be occurring in the school, and examining to what extent these 7 elements are embedded in the school's culture. And when I think of that first one, developing and sharing a vision, I really want to pay homage to Lauren Roger, former head teacher, who was inspirational in this regard with her love of learning, her passion for professional reading, and her unrelenting focus on learning and teaching. And it's great for us that our new head teacher, Michelle, shares that same passion for learning and teaching and the same ambitions to make North Berwick the best school and the best learning organisation. So what I hope to achieve by the end of the presentation is for you to see how the 7 elements that are listed here feature in the working life of North Berwick High School. And when I look at this quote, this is a quote that's lifted from Putting Faces on the Data, Fullan and Sharrett. And when we look at how we have developed a shared vision for high quality learning and teaching at North Berwick, I think we have tried to establish and continually build knowledge of the non-negotiables that Fullan and Sharrett refer to in this quote. So those teaching practices that are so effective and so high impact that building collective knowledge on these practices is a priority. And one of the most important artifacts that we have in the school is our teaching practices for effective learning, which supports how we develop the specificity and the consistency of good practice in every classroom. And our teaching practices, you can see them here on this slide. Our teaching practices for effective learning came about after a 3-month conversation with staff featuring focus groups and surveys about what constitutes high quality learning and teaching. And this conversation led to the identification of the 10 practices that you see listed here. And our teaching practices for effective learning feature in and help frame our learning, teaching and assessment improvement work. And each of the practices have prompts, self-reflective reminders about what we are looking for within each practice. So to give you an example, here is what we are saying about effective learning goals, high quality instruction, differentiated teaching and pupil-led learning. And to be honest, it took some time to deliberate over these prompts for each practice. And some we really deliberated at length about what what the content was going to be. So, for example, differentiated teaching and pupil-led learning, both of these are somewhat conceptually fluid. So a crucial starting point was to get a working definition to ensure that there was an understanding and collective meaning across the school about what we actually mean by effective differentiation and what do we think constitutes pupil-led learning, even before starting to look at the practices itself. And as you can see, we look at pupil-led learning as a demonstration of metacognitive aptitude, pupils acting on feedback independently and setting their own learning goals. And what's really important to stress, I think, at this point, is that each of the teaching practices are grounded in a strong evidence base. And our Learning and Teaching Hub, which is just a shared Google Drive, and our professional reading library, catalogues this evidence base for each of the identified teaching practices. And when looking at how we support the continuous knowledge development of the teaching practices identified in our teaching practices for effective learning, the school's professional learning communities are one of the most important ways we do this. And the early establishment of PLCs was by Robert Jones, who is one of the other deputies at North Berwick. Robert looked at PLCs as part of his project for the flexible route into headship. And I think that was about 2015, 2016. It was before I arrived at the school. And by design, the PLCs are collaborative and inquiry-led. And over the last 5 years, as you can see, there have been various iterations. Voluntary participation initially, then compulsory for all staff with time being allocated in the school's working time agreement. And there have been faculty and cross-subject groups and sometimes a mixture of both over the last few years. And in terms of how we have approached inquiry-based professional learning, various tools and constructs have been employed. So for example, PDSA, inquiry spirals, and more recently, data walls as part of our partnership project with Edinburgh University tutors, Zoe Robertson, Gillian Robinson, Rosemary Grady, and Nicola Cars. Now, hopefully, you're going to see a short video clip, and this is from Georgy Brownlee, who is our faculty leader of Humanities. And Georgy is just going to give you a bit of an insight into her experience of inquiry-based learning in her faculty.
So the Humanities team we've done a fair few inquiries now. We kind of started really working collaboratively on inquiry from about 2017, and each year we've just progressed and they've got a bit more in detail. So in terms of working, that first one that we ever launched was everyone round the table and kind of thinking about the learners that we had in front of us, what would benefit them. So actually we came up with the idea of looking at how learners themselves learn. So within the faculty, we all kind of took a different direction within that inquiry, went off, did their own readings, we shared, but actually the data that came back, so one member of staff, for example, was looking at retrieval practice, another was looking at how they note take, another was looking at, I'm trying to remember, questioning technique, direct instruction, that kind of thing. So when we looked at the kind of before and after data, yeah, it showed that when you'd focused on that particular thing with that class or with those students, that improvement had been made overall.
So looking at our PLCs, I think we acknowledge that not all collaboration is good collaboration. And in terms of PLCs in schools, there is much evidence that points to the fact that they do not necessarily lead to improved pupil outcomes. So something which has proved a useful and recurring reminder for me when considering how to culture high quality PLCs is this Venn diagram from Louise Stoll. And I've shared this with staff at North Berwick a few times. And what I like about this diagram is how it reminds us to consider the intention, the enactment, and the experience of PLCs. And I like the use of the word cultivating specifically because it does take time to develop and to embed PLCs. And the way PLCs evolve and grow should be directly influenced by the feedback from teachers about their experiences of being part of a professional learning community. And in North Berwick, we always seek to explore and examine and evaluate staff experiences of professional learning, and Guskey's 5 levels continues to be a useful tool to help with this. And on this slide here, it gives you an indication of some of the feedback that has come back from staff about their experiences of PLCs in session 2017-18 and session 2018-19. And some possible conclusions that could be drawn from this feedback. Firstly, staff felt greater ownership over their inquiry in session 2018 and 2019 than they did in 2017-2018. And that was the session where there was a directed focus. So building long-term knowledge, looking at practices like interleaving, space practice and dual coding. And when looking at the feedback about the quality of discussion remaining constant throughout the year, I think session 2018-2019, there was a greater consideration based on the previous year's feedback about where to situate PLC meetings within the school's CLPL calendar. And what was coming through from staff, and it still does come through to an extent, is that post-Christmas demands with senior phase prelims and the quick march towards the NQ exam diet was kind of closing down the headspace for staff, and the immediate pressures and demands meant that inquiry projects were not being nourished in the way that they had been in the first half of the session. But across all years, what is coming through is the positive feedback in relation to the value of PLCs and how meaningful the discussions are within them. Now, this is a very, very short clip here, but you're going to hear briefly from a few pupils about their experience of learning at North Berwick High School. And this gives you a wee taste of how the work of PLCs has impacted on their learning.
To be a learner at North Berwick High School, I think it's every classroom you feel included, and with every teacher they feel as though they want you to succeed, and they try in the school, they try to help us very early on figure out what works best for us and like what blend of everything works well for us. So just me, for example, I find flashcards, just a small bit of writing to help jog my memory. I found that worked really early on when I was in like S2, S3, and I was able to carry that on through S4, 5 and 6.
We're recently given, whiteboards, so I think that's also another way to really get people out of their shells participating in class, because sometimes, people just say, don't really want to, but I think when you make it interactive, everyone's quite into the lesson as well, so I think that's really helpful too.
So we do a lot of stuff through like the learning scientists and their revision techniques, a lot about flashcards and like space retrieval practice. So instead of like cramming for an exam, we're told that you revise throughout the entire year and keep everything taking over, so that level of stress is spread out a lot more. And we even do that in class sometimes, where you might have, a Friday lesson, just, hey, we're going back to what we did 2 weeks ago. See if you can remember it. And like what Elise said with the whiteboards, it's just quick, write down your answer on the whiteboard. Teacher goes around, has all the everyone's answers.
Now, if I could just briefly mention our professional learning as critical inquiry project with Edinburgh University. This began in August 2019, but as a result of the first lockdown in March last year, the project's plans were significantly disrupted. However, there was a lot of professional learning up to this point. Zoe, Rosemary, Gillian and Nicola were leading face-to-face sessions with staff in school. There were online sessions too, and we attended twilights at Murray House, 2 twilights at Murray House. And inquiry leads, so these were teachers who were leading the PLCs within the school, were being supported to learn more about data collection methodology, and the extended leadership team were looking at their role as pedagogical leaders in the school. And this project, although it was disrupted, it really has helped us progress our approach to inquiry and what it means to carry that disposition of teacher-inquirer. And all of the existing knowledge that had been built up and developed within the school about practitioner inquiry was largely built on project-based inquiries. However, the external expertise we were able to benefit from through PLACE has helped us consider a move towards inquiry as stance rather than an add-on. And two of the key education texts that supported the PLACE project, you can see here on the slide, the putting faces on the data and research methods for understanding professional learning. And Stephen Frew, who is our faculty leader of business and computing, is going to share a few thoughts on how PLACE has helped outcomes in his faculty.
Faculty, what we really seemed to enjoy and found very useful was the partnership PLACE programme with Edinburgh University. That gave us a real good opportunity to really dive into data and interrogate it and see exactly where we could make not so much massive big changes, but small changes that actually have quite a big impact for our young people. And for us, that gave us the opportunity to really focus on, so we had a narrowed focus on a particular year group, and we focused on one or two pupils within a class. And that then gave my team the opportunity to then share that information at faculty meetings, and then that information came to me, and I would gather that, and I would start to generate a data wall, and then from that we would start to see a theme emerging. And very similar to what Georgie was saying, my guys were looking at different areas, so they were maybe looking at some differentiation, but they were also looking at things like direct instruction. So it was very similar themes, but they were looking at something different. And that was really useful, because when that came to me gathering that information and then presenting it in the data wall, that the theme of differentiation was definitely coming through. And that then gave us a focus to work on within the faculty and to then shape our faculty improvement plan going forward. And that allowed us to really kind of dig deep into our curriculum, our offering, but also the way that we were actually delivering the curriculum as well. So we found that very, very useful. And what we're finding now is that pupils are starting to access the curriculum much more, and we're finding that pupils are more engaged. Those, in particular, those pupils that we had a focus on as well, where the information was coming from.
So moving just briefly on to look at some of the feedback in our HMIE Summary of Findings report. Undoubtedly, the work of PLCs have had a positive impact on pupils' experiences of learning and their outcomes. And it was really welcomed when this was recognised by HMIE. But what has also been of crucial importance in consolidating the work of PLCs is the school's whole school self-evaluation processes of learning, teaching and assessment. And there's been a bit of a paradigm shift in how we see whole school self-evaluation, not just as a quality assurance tool, but as one of the most important ways of progressing professional learning. And this slide has quite a bit of information on it, so I'm not going to go into the detail here, but I think it's important just to acknowledge how the methodology of our faculty reviews has progressed over the last 3 years. And just to stress here that the reviews happen every year and every faculty is involved. So every faculty is part of the review process. And two of the significant changes that happened after year one, so the session 17-18, was that faculty leaders were part of the observation team. And secondly, another change was that in order to support knowledge exchange, faculties were paired off in 2018 and 2019, and then they were put in trios the following year, 2019-2020. So this required faculty leaders to observe teachers in their partner faculties, to attend their partners' focus groups, and to attend their partners' triangulation meetings. So not only are the review processes important for examining progress and gaps between current and expected practice, they now are one of the most important ways we exchange knowledge about learning and teaching practice. And in the reviews of 1920, we focused on learning goals and instructional quality. And to support this endeavour, every member of staff was given their own copy of Tom Sherrington's Rosenshine's Principles. And as a wee nod to the school's value of curiosity, the senior leadership team wrote a wee message to each member of staff on the school's Curiosity Values card. Now you're going to hear from Georgie and Stephen once again about their experience of the school's faculty review processes.
what it's allowed the humanities to do is actually have evidence and proof. So we think we're doing this well, and we think this is happening along the right lines, and the members of the faculty choose to do teaching and learning in this way because of the end result. And really what the reviews allowed was, through triangulation of evidence, you've got your pupil opinion, you've got what's been observed in the classroom, and you've got what you're saying you're doing. And when that all is coming together and it's giving you an end result of evidence, then it's something to really base, well, here's what we're doing well, and here's what we need to look at. So I think it's extremely powerful. And I think because it allowed faculty leaders, the way it was set up, so even the faculty review processes themselves, they were also refined year on year. So they were enhanced, and we all reviewed them, and we progressed the actual process. So when you, as a faculty leader, were getting into another faculty to have a look and examine how they go about running their faculty and how they respond to teaching and learning, then there's things that you think, right, I'm going to use that, that's fantastic. Or there's things that you want to challenge and you want to question.
I've really enjoyed going into other faculties and seeing what is going on in other lessons and taking away some really good ideas, and then coming back into my own faculty and sharing these ideas, and then having a discussion about how we can then improve our own learning and teaching. And again, it's about, I've been really, as a faculty leader as well, I have really kind of proud moment in terms of having my guys share their good practice as well, and helping to improve learning and teaching for all across the school. So definitely agree with Georgie. I would also say that what it does is it really, by having these faculty reviews, it really creates a culture for improvement, and it creates that kind of teamwork environment within the school, and it helps build relationships as well with staff. So for example, I'm working within the faculty review system, I'll be working with staff that that I tend maybe not to talk to on a daily basis. You might see them now and again at staff events and things like that within the school, or whole school events. But it gave us a real good opportunity to work closely with members of staff out with the faculty. So it does really create a really whole school positive ethos, if you like, in terms of that main focus of trying to kind of drive for improvement across the school. So I've really enjoyed it, and I know my guys we really enjoy those triangulation meetings like Georgie was talking about, where we have the feedback from a variety of different sources, and we can really kind of dig down on exactly where we need to improve. But also, I think it's about reassurance as well, because there's lots of good practice going on out across the school. So sometimes it's just really good for staff to feel like, I'm actually doing a really good job, and I'm providing really good experiences for the pupils. So just that kind of reassurance, the faculty reviews definitely bring that, as well as the things in the areas to improve as well.
And one of the things that we have really focused on as part of the faculty review processes is to ensure that classroom observations are not just a capture of superficial judgments based on a snapshot of a lesson. We therefore have spent time with the middle leaders in the ELT meetings about the methodology of classroom observation and post-lesson discussion. And prior to the reviews commencing each year, we have spent time in ELT meetings looking at best practice in conducting observations, beyond simply just filling in an observation pro forma. So we have spent time looking at how to conduct a post-lesson discussion, how to manage a conversation that has the aim of making a teacher's tacit knowledge and theories of action explicit. And coaching methodology is a big part of how we do this. And this slide here is just a summary of what we aim to do within a post-observation discussion. And most of what is listed here that you can see on this slide, it seems very obvious, but there can be quite a difference between what we intend a post-lesson observation discussion to be like and what actually happens in practice. So these pointers are useful when doing that mental rehearsal and that mental preparation prior to a post-lesson discussion. And bringing this presentation to a close, I just wanted to mention one of our COVID recovery approaches in relation to learning, teaching and assessment. So we launched the PLCs for this session a few weeks ago at a whole school CAT session. And the main focus for PLCs this session is to develop a more nuanced understanding of what effective differentiation is, so we can better respond to the diverse needs of pupils. And in doing this, we are also sure to highlight the ineffective practice that continues to sit under the banner of differentiation. Staff will be working in faculty PLCs initially in the first half of the year, then going into mixed subject groups after Christmas. And in line with the Faces on the Data methodology, staff will be considering the learning of specific pupils they teach. And this will help potentiate teacher reflection on how they can better respond to those pupils whose knowledge and skills gap has been compounded by remote learning last session. And just, I think it's important as well, just to mention too, that in our feedback from our inspection back in February, meeting the needs of pupils more effectively in all classes was an area that was picked up on too, that needed a bit of a closer look. And just to finish by making reference to this construct about how we can understand our experience of professional learning. I shared this with staff when the PLCs were launched a few weeks ago. And I think the incredible turbulence of last year and a half, has greatly affected what we are thinking and how we are feeling. And that funnel of influence that comes from within, therefore will have a great bearing on our experience of professional learning this year. But what I've asked staff to really consider is the moral purpose of our PLCs this year, to try and ensure that individually and collectively, what we are acting upon this year in terms of learning, teaching and assessment, it really, really counts. And I hope what has come through in this presentation is that the well-informed approaches to professional learning is for us about knowing professional learning needs on both an individual and a collective basis, knowing where to direct our attention, our resources and our time. And all of this comes from how we have continued to develop our understanding of data and data collection at all levels. And in terms of innovation, well, I'd like to think that is about how we have translated a vision for what we want professional learning to look and feel like into a practical reality at North Berwick High School. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Fraser. And I suppose what I would say just to conclude is that we definitely continue to learn and adapt, as we've all had to do over the last couple of years. I've been really struck by staff's receptiveness to faculty reviews, albeit with a very clear strategic focus on the BGE and on differentiation and meeting learner needs. But I've been really amazed by staff's willingness to really continue this focus on really high quality learning and teaching. And I feel really proud of all that the school has achieved and intend to ensure that we continue to prioritise professional learning and a focus on high quality learning, teaching and assessment under my leadership. And I think that's why we're all in this game. We want the best possible outcomes for the young people in our care. And yeah, thank you so much to Fraser for putting the slides together today. And thank you so much for attending our session.
So if I could just come back in there and just again to thank North Berwick High School and all the staff who have been involved in developing this further since my colleagues visited. It certainly was inspirational. It was lovely to listen to how it has progressed despite all the challenges of the last couple of years. And certainly a lot of comments coming through the chat about the use of evidence-based, the use of research into practice and making sure that it's actually, well, your work is triangulated in the way that obviously we would do when we're visiting schools as well. Interesting too that the young people themselves, from my point of view, talked first of all about how they felt included in the school and that the teachers really wanted them to succeed. And moving on, that small changes can have a big impact leading to greater engagement. I'm just wondering if there's anybody in the audience who would like to come in, if you would like to just pop your hand up Chat has been going quite quickly while I've been talking, so I'm afraid I haven't been able to keep up with it. If there's any questions in there that you would like to come in and ask, could you please do so?
Francis, I see Jane has posted. She's just wondering, how are staff allocated the time? Is it after the school day, or is it time given during the school day? Just wondered if Michelle and Fraser could come in there.
I see she's popped her hand up. I don't know if she wants to come in herself. Jane,
do
you want to say?
There we go,
Good morning. Thank you so much for that, by the way, Fraser and Michelle. It's been absolutely fascinating to get an insight. And can I come work at your school, please? It sounds fab. It's just that kind of idea of time, because one of the things that I've noticed over the last few weeks, especially being back in and around schools, is that time seems to be quite precious. Whether it's because we know cover's an issue, we know timetable's an issue, COVID has people dropping left, right and centre. How do you manage the time of your staff then, so they're not overwhelmed in a way? Because this is a fantastic opportunity, and yes, it's more just the kind of timing of it. So if you were to advise another school how to put this in place, how would you advise them to manage their time?
So I can talk about just some of that, and then I'll hand over to Fraser. So we do build in time for our professional learning communities from the very beginning of the year at our whole school CAT sessions. So if we have a 2-hour CAT session, we often allocate an hour of that time to PLCs, and that's agreed by our unions and signed off from the very beginning of the year. And I think it's been that way since 2017. So we put the time for our learning communities into the working time agreement. Fraser, do you want to say a little bit more about how we fit in the faculty reviews?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you said about the PLCs as well, Michelle, the faculty leaders are asked on their faculty improvement plans too, to align their professional learning time to the whole school formal professional learning activities within PLCs too. So what happens in the faculties very much complements what the whole school formal professional learning priorities are. And I alluded to this earlier in the presentation about really carefully thinking about where to situate the PLC meeting times. And what's come back from staff when they're given the opportunity to feed back, every year is, later on in the session, there's a lot of pressures. That's the reality in secondary schools with the national qualifications. So what we've done is looking at sort of front loading some of the meeting times in the first half of the year, where there's a bit more space for staff to really nourish those inquiries in a high quality way. And it's not to say that they're forgotten about in the second half of the year, not at all, but it's just to acknowledge the reality of the immediate pressures in secondary schools. And faculty reviews, are, they're not built into the working time agreement specifically, but that has just become a really strong cultural feature of the school. And I think what from year one has, and I use the phrase a bit of a paradigm shift, I think we've really tried to focus on the benefits in terms of professional learning through the review process. And the first year that they were introduced, to be honest, there was a bit of not anxiety, that's the wrong word, but just this hadn't been done to that scale before, where every faculty was involved. And it was intense in terms of just managing the technicalities of it, in those 3 months, September to November. But over the years, staff have really welcomed the interest that the reviews take in terms of learning and teaching and being in classrooms, observing practice, discussing learning and teaching, and that focus on professional learning.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Fraser. Thanks for taking that. I realise we've only got a few minutes left, but one question that has come in is that would it be possible to get a contact email to discuss some aspects in more detail? I don't know if either Michelle or Fraser, if you're willing to put your emails into the chat so that other people can pick up on that and no doubt fill your inbox.
Absolutely, I'm sure Fraser and I would be happy to do that. We'll do that just now.
And just maybe our last couple of just short questions perhaps, or short answers. One, what approach is used to welcome equity of pupil voice to ensure the triangulated feedback approach? Either of you willing to take that question? So it was,
yeah, so this year we've pared things back a little bit just because of the ongoing limitations that COVID places upon us. But this year we're going to just use Google Survey with all S1 and S2 pupils and parents to get some triangulation. So we aren't going to go ahead with pupil and parent focus groups in school this year, but we're going to use technology to try and capture that data. Fraser, do you want to say a little bit about how that's happened in the past?
Yep, so the last time the reviews occurred wasn't last session before. It was a specific focus, very deep and narrow focus on S3, and every single S3 pupil completed a survey. We used a question stems from WeHigios, so every single pupil was able to feed back about their experiences of learning and teaching. And in focus groups that have happened previously in the review processes, we've ensured that there's a profile of pupils. So we've carefully considered the composition of focus groups with looking at through the lens of equity, additional support needs, to really get that wide range of feedback from pupils, and to make sure that the feedback is representative of the diverse profiles of pupils in the school.
Thank you. Maybe just a couple of minutes on the last question about, you mentioned improvements in pupil engagement. How did you go about measuring this? In 2 minutes.
Fraser?
I'm just going to go back to, through our really rigorous review processes. We, through those 3 months, September, October, November, in a typical year, every single member of staff is observed, and we really carefully consider, what is being observed as well. And I mentioned that in the presentation, how to go into a classroom and to really, focus on high quality observation, and the post-lesson discussion as well, of course. But engagement comes from looking at data as well. There was a strong thread throughout the presentation about that, using all the sources of data that are available to us, looking at that hard data, the quantitative data as well. That's a key indicator of engagement and the quality of learning and teaching and the quality of curriculum. And the everyday data, the learner conversations, the looking at pupils' work, their engagement in class. So all of that, we use to try and reach strong conclusions about the strength of learning and teaching. And of course, there's always things that we're looking to improve on as well. And we're really delighted to be able to get back into observing classroom practice as part of our review process this session. And as Michelle says, it's a bit of a lighter touch given the situation, the context, but it'll be fantastic just to have that real front and centre focus on learning and teaching.
Thank you so much. I'm aware that this session will end very shortly and we'll all get chopped out. So just instead of getting cut out mid-sentence, just again to thank you both and everybody else in the North Berwick community for taking the time in what is undoubtedly a very pressurised time in schools at the moment. We're aware of that. So taking the time to give us this presentation, to share your journey, and also the message that it's not done overnight. I mean, I think that's very clear, that it's about your own context, about what's happening in your own school, and using the data, the research evidence, as well as your own data. Where are you and where do you need to go next? But thank you both, and please extend our thanks from the Scottish Learning Festival and from Education Scotland for taking the time to share your journey. Apologies for anyone if I've missed your question. There probably are some in there, but you've got Michelle and Fraser's email addresses if you would like to follow them up individually. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks, Frances.
Thanks, Frances. Bye-bye.